The convoy had stalled at the ridge. Comms were patchy. The lead truck's sensor feed showed nothing. And the Overwatch drone was 3 minutes late. Everyone waited for orders. Radios crackled. Arguments brewed. She wasn't part of the tactical loop just assigned to monitor traffic patterns from the support trailer, but she saw it. The way dust moved at the far edge of the thermal map, just once. She didn't shout. She rerouted one line of code, quietly shifted the convoy path by 30 meters, and said nothing. 10 minutes later, they found the tripwire where the trucks would have passed. Staff Sergeant Dana Holt arrived at the outer gate just before 0400, as she always did. The air was still sharp from the night cycle, the kind of quiet cold that settled into exposed gear and clung to metal surfaces long after the sun came up. She moved without ceremony, nodding once to the gate camera before stepping into the small steel hut that served as the checkpoint's heart. Overhead, the halogen lights buzzed in an uneven rhythm, casting faint yellow patterns across the pavement. The base perimeter stretched behind her like a forgotten map. And beyond it, the desert waited in silence. Inside the hut, the equipment was already humming. Dana checked the analog power strip, then ran her eyes over the monitors, each glowing faintly with grid overlays and entry logs. She placed her laminated checklist flat on the desk and smoothed it with her palm. Her handwriting in the logbook was already lined up and clean, even rows every name from the previous shift marked with timestamps, vehicle IDs, and pass confirmations. She didn't need to double-check, but she always did. Her uniform was regulation. But the fabric had softened from repetition. The boots were worn but polished. Her flashlight, clipped to the right side of her vest, had survived 4 base issues and 2 replacements. It turned on without flicker every time. She tapped it once to confirm, then clipped it back in place. A rumble from behind signaled the arrival of the rotation vehicle. The new batch of MPs filed out in varying degrees of half-readiness. One of them, Corporal Brinks, stretched his arms and looked at Dana like someone watching a museum piece reset. Back again. Holt, I swear you've been at this gate longer than the paint on those barricades. Dana didn't answer right away. She moved to the outer kiosk, scanning her ID through the slot and watching the red light blink to green. Then she spoke, without turning. 134 shifts. Straight. Brinks laughed, half impressed, half dismissive. You counting like that because you like it out here? Or 'cause they forgot to rotate you out? Another MP leaned on the edge of the doorway, smirking. Some folks just get too cozy with routine. Dana kept her eyes on the panel, making sure the gate arm responded with the usual hiss. Routine's the only part that works, she said quietly. Her supervisor arrived 10 minutes late, carrying a thermal mug and no apology. He gave her a nod that landed somewhere between acknowledgement and muscle memory, then started flipping through clipboard entries without making eye contact. We good here? He asked, already half focused on the coffee in his hand. Dana replied. Scanner updated. Zone cameras sin fed. Tower cross-check at 100%. Good. Good, he said, though he hadn't listened. Any real activity? Just the usual. Package delivery ran early. Contractor badged in wrong and doubled back. Logged it at 0232. He barely glanced up. You flagged it. Logged it. No red tag. He shrugged, clearly uninterested. All right. Kick back if you can. Nothing ever happens out here anyway. She didn't kick back. Instead, she walked the perimeter once more. Flashlight angled low across the gravel near the outer fencing. The outer lane barrier had a dent from last week's container truck. No one had logged the impact, so she marked it quietly in the margins of the report sheet and drew a small circle around the timestamp. Back inside. The others had already settled into half-joking banter. Brinks was retelling a story about a gate runner back in Kandahar, something half true and half embellished. But no one cared. Dana sat beside the monitor bank and adjusted the brightness on screen 3. The feed from Tower 11 had a slight flicker. She logged it. Not serious. Just a pattern worth noting. Brinks leaned in, still carrying the grin from his own punchline. You know what they should do. Rotate you in with the K9 teams. Give the dogs someone to talk to. Dana said nothing. She signed off her checklist and flipped the page. One line caught her eye, an outdated code left in the manifest. She made a note beside it. Then closed the logbook. At 0500, the sky began to shift. The eastern rim of the horizon took on the faintest outline of blue. Dana adjusted her vest strap and leaned back in her seat. But her eyes stayed on the monitor. Nothing moved. That was the job. Watching while nothing moved. Later, someone would ask why she hadn't rotated out. Why she didn't file more requests for reassignment or seek training clearance like the others. But Dana already knew the answer. This wasn't where soldiers went to shine. This was where things didn't happen. Because someone was still watching. Because someone had always been watching. The engine hum reached Dana's ears just before the headlights rounded the bend. It was past 2100, and the checkpoint had been quiet for hours. She rose from her stool, adjusted hair vest strap, and stepped into the beam of the entry light. The vehicle rolled forward slowly, a dark gray civilian 4x4 with weathered contractor decals on both doors and faint government tags pressed into the front bumper. The hood was dusty, the tires freshly cleaned, but one of the back panels had paint chipped around the edge like it had been scrubbed recently. That caught her eye. The window rolled down and the driver leaned out, smiling with a kind of manufactured ease. He was in his late 40s, wearing an unzipped fleece with an old tech contractor logo and a visitor badge clipped loosely to his collar. Evening. Sergeant. Got a late manifest update. Command said I could roll through last-minute uplink fix on the comms trailer. You know how it is. Dana didn't respond right away. She looked down at her clipboard and flipped a page, scanning the list of authorized entries. The man's name wasn't there. I'll need to see your manifest sheet, she said calmly, pen tapping against the edge of the board. He waved a laminated card at her, like it was a joke. It's all logged already. You want to call Lieutenant Harker, I'm sure she'll vouch. Or we can sit here all night playing checklist games. Dana reached for the portable scanner. She ran it slowly along the driver's side window, catching the embedded chip under the plastic badge. The machine hesitated for a second, flicked red, then returned a yellow bar. Badge mismatch, she said. This ID isn't assigned to this vehicle. The man chuckled, then leaned his elbow on the window frame. Look, Sergeant, it's late, and I've got high-gain equipment in the back that's supposed to be patched in by 0200. If it doesn't go live, your base comms are going to be blind until next cycle. You want that on your name. She didn't rise to the bait. Step out of the vehicle. Sire, I need to scan the rear cargo area. That broke his rhythm. He blinked once, then shifted his hand toward the console. You serious? Dana didn't move. Her voice stayed even. Standard procedure. Manifest scan and visual confirmation. He climbed out slowly, keeping one hand visible and the other fiddling with his phone like it gave him authority. She moved to the back of the vehicle. A canvas tarp was stretched over the cargo bay. Beneath it, a shape caught her attention, curved, metallic, and too compact to be HVAC hardware. It had two symmetrical vents near the base and the faint outline of a vent ring. Something about it didn't belong. She pulled her flashlight and stepped closer. The man's voice came from just behind her shoulder. It's just rigging support. Field grade. won't show up on your usual manifest because it's tagged experimental. But again, Lieutenant Harker signed off. I'm just the mule. Dana wrote down the plate number, the ID code, and a note about the cargo mismatch. Then she stepped back. You're not cleared to enter. You'll need to reroute to secondary. Tell Harker to submit a cross-verified manifest. Until then, the gate stays closed. The man stared at her for a long second, something sharper in his expression now. He didn't argue. He just smiled again, colder this time. All right, Sergeant Holt, he said, reading her name tape. You stick to your clipboard. I'll be back when the paperwork's caught up. Let's hope you're still the one guarding the door. He climbed back into the vehicle, reversed with careful precision, and turned slowly down the access road. Dana watched until the taillights disappeared. Then she looked back at the scanner log. The error code had reset, but she wrote a note in the margin just the same. The system wouldn't remember what she saw, but she would. The operations office smelled like dry paper and stale coffee. A fan whirred slowly in the corner, pushing warm air that did nothing to move the haze of fatigue hanging over the room. The fluorescent light above Dana's head flickered twice and steadied, throwing pale bars across the floor, tiles and metal shelving. She stood by the central desk, clipboard in hand. The edges of the report already softened from being carried through 2 buildings. Her supervisor sat slouched in a cracked vinyl chair, boots up on a supply crate, mug balanced on his chest. He didn't look up as she placed the form on his desk. He picked it up with 2 fingers, like it might still be drying, and skimmed the top few lines. This about the contractor, he mumbled, flipping the page. Dana nodded once. Right. You logged it last night. Got it flagged here as manifest discrepancy. He scratched the side of his head. Probably just a routing foul-up. Let Intel sort it out. It wasn't just the paperwork, Dana said evenly. His ID didn't match the badge log. Rear cargo had unauthorized hardware, military-coded, but not listed anywhere in the manifest. He finally looked up, squinting. You scanned it. I tried. Tag gave a return pulse with low-fidelity echo. Could have been shielded. He stared for a second longer, then shrugged. Your perimeter detail. If it didn't blow up or run the gate, it's above your lane. File the form. We'll check if Intel has anything active in that channel. She didn't argue, just turned to hand the form to the admin clerk in the rear. The young specialist barely glanced at the contents before sliding it into the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. The drawer was already full of reports, labeled with handwritten notes like non-actioned, pending, and resolved. No action. A fresh coffee ring spread across the top sheet as he set his mug down without noticing. On her way out, Dana passed the comms alcove where 2 lieutenants hovered around an equipment rack. One of them lowered his voice, not quite enough to hide the words. You see that MP Holt again. She's still logging gate delays, like the next war starts with a late delivery. The other one laughed quietly. She probably logs her own lunch breaks. Those checklist types always want to save the world one form at a time. Dana didn't stop. She kept walking toward the mess. Steps steady. Back straight. Behind her, the laughter trailed off as the door swung shut. At the chow line, she picked up a tray, nodded to the cook, and chose the quiet corner near the emergency exit. She didn't pull out her phone. Instead, she reviewed her own copy of the report unsigned, dated, annotated in her handwriting. Later that night, she tucked it into the back of her notebook with the others. She didn't need a red flag. She'd already seen where the failure lines started. Not with explosions, not with alarms, just one voice marked, "Not your job." And then silence. The security terminal had no windows, just rows of old beige towers humming faintly beneath long aluminum shelves, the walls lined with blinking routers and faded instruction cards curling at the corners. It was a forgotten room at the end of a hall. No one walked at night. Too cold from overcompensating AC, too bright under harsh fluorescent tubes that never stopped buzzing. At this hour, it was usually empty. Tonight, Dana Holt had signed herself in on a clipboard that no one would check. She keyed into the archive terminal, settling into the narrow plastic chair with her field notebook open beside her. The system was slow, always had been. Running on a patched-together backend no one had touched in years. But it still pulled the logs. She began with gate footage from 3 days prior, fast scrolling through timestamps, noting every vehicle that matched the contractor's 4x4 model. There were dozens, but only one had the same plate base, and it was off by one character. She backtracked, scanning access codes, ID logs, anything tied to that variation. The vehicle had entered at 01:47 2 nights earlier. Under a different driver ID and different clearance name, neither one matched the man she saw last night. That entry had been greenlit by a manual override from supply chain routing. She checked the override code. The initials meant nothing to her. Pulling up the video feed, she waited for the frame to buffer. The cameras on that side of the gate were older, slower, but reliable. It took time, but the clip appeared. The vehicle rolled up at an angle that should have concealed the interior, but when Dana adjusted the contrast and zoomed, a shape caught her eye. In the rear seat, just visible in the crosslight, sat a rounded metallic casing, not a container, not a crate, something more precise. 2 heat exhaust ports were etched into the back side. With a faint line of vent striping, she recognized from a spec sheet months ago. It wasn't supposed to exist anymore. She paused the footage and leaned back, heartbeat steady but tightening. The object was the same shape, same size, as a drone power core, a deployable unit marked destroyed after an engagement in theater the year before. She'd read the after-action logs. A contractor convoy had gone missing, with 2 experimental units on board. The record said both had been lost. Disposed? She remembered the word clearly. Dana pulled up the manifest for that same week. It was buried 2 layers deep in non-priority entries, listed under base-to-base equipment return. She found it after 30 minutes of combing tags. The entry was brief. 1 item, Drone Support Core. Series D. Status destroyed. Routing disposal. Complete. There was no disposal location listed. No chain of custody. No photographic confirmation. She hit the print button. The laser printer in the corner whirred to life slowly, then spat out 3 pages. The vehicle log, the manifest entry, and a still frame of the drone core casing. She circled the serial number in red ink. Then, using a blank page from her field book, she created a small annotation serial conflict. Unauthorized access. Visual confirmation pending. She folded it in thirds and tucked it into the inner pocket of her vest. Beside her coffee cup, the lid had begun to sag inward from the heat. The steam had weakened the paper. It gave way slowly, collapsing along one side. Dana didn't notice. Her eyes were still locked on the screen. She tagged the entry as unverified anomaly and closed the console. No one would see that flag. Not unless they knew exactly where to look. And no one would look. It wasn't part of a scheduled review. It wasn't under threat protocol. It wasn't even highlighted. She stood and stretched her shoulders slowly, rotating her right wrist once. Her body moved quietly, without tension. But her mind was cataloging every step. The system hadn't broken. It had simply never been designed to catch what didn't scream. She stepped out into the hallway. Her boots made no sound on the worn tile. Behind her, the hum of the servers continued. Steady. Blind. Whatever that casing was, it hadn't passed by accident. And she hadn't logged it because she was told to. She did it because no one else would. And now, she couldn't unknow it. The armory was lit by 2 weak bulbs, their green hue barely reaching the back shelves. A single oscillating fan creaked in the corner, shifting the air just enough to remind anyone inside that the space was real, not sealed in stillness. Dana Holt stepped through the doorway with a printed requisition form in one hand, and her vest already half-buckled. She didn't say anything to the quartermaster on duty. He looked up, gave a nod, and turned back to his coffee. She moved down the aisle with practiced familiarity. The shelves held the usual standby gear riot kits, breaching sets, containment tools. Most of it had been untouched for months. Dana selected what she needed without hesitation. She slid a net launcher from its cradle and clipped a folded sling to her belt. From the locked cabinet, she keyed out a canister marked "for demonstration only" and lifted an EMP dart gun, checking the chamber and battery status. The range was limited, but close enough would count. Next came the beanbag rounds, 5 sealed in a strip pouch, weighed evenly in her hand. She loaded them slowly into the tube's chamber, then stowed it in her secondary holster. No one else had requested this gear tonight. No one else had flagged anything. She stepped into the small prep alcove near the lockers and set her helmet on the bench. The straps on her vest were slightly off-center, so she adjusted them with both hands until the weight balanced evenly across her back. The chin strap clicked once into place, tight but not restrictive. On the far wall, beneath the row of nameplates, her locker stood closed. She opened it slowly and pulled out a blank envelope. Inside, she slid a single folded page. It listed a license plate, a manifest tag, and a red-circled serial number. Beneath it, in her handwriting, were the words, "Footage Backup, Terminal 3 Archive. Entry flagged. Vehicle confirmed." She sealed the envelope, wrote her name across the front in block letters, and placed it upright between her spare gloves and a first aid pouch. She didn't pause, didn't explain. Beside her, the overhead bulb buzzed again, briefly flickering. She tapped the flashlight on her vest, watching it glow to life without fail. Her baton slid into its sheath. Her sidearm clicked into the holster with the same firm resistance she expected. She checked the analog radio worn but fully functional and clipped it to her belt loop. The standard comm unit still rested in her main rig, but she had learned not to trust systems designed for clear skies. The quartermaster didn't say a word as she passed him again. He was filling out a form on a clipboard, eyes half-focused. She handed over the requisition sheet. He scanned it with a barcode reader and said, "Demo gear." Dana nodded. "Just a precaution." He shrugged. "Take what you need. You're the one out there." Outside, the sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky had shifted just slightly to that dull pre-dawn blue. She walked the access corridor with her gear tight, her steps silent. There were no orders backing her. No one had told her to do this. But she was ready. Not because someone believed her, because no one else would be. The fog rolled in thick after midnight, curling low across the tarmac like spilled smoke. Rain had passed just minutes before, leaving the asphalt slick and shining beneath the flicker of faulty halogen checkpoint lights. Staff Sergeant Dana Holt stood at the outer barrier, shoulders squared, gear in place. The quiet was total, broken only by the distant hum of a generator and the uneven pulse of her analog radio scanning static. She was alone. Then she saw it. Headlights. Dark. A vehicle eased forward through the mist, moving slow enough to avoid sound. Tires crunching softly against the gravel shoulder. The silhouette matched the same 4x4 from earlier in the week contractor plates. Same dented fender, but this time with a coated front grille and no visible decal. Behind it, another set of lights flared briefly, then dimmed. A second car, smaller and tucked behind, waited at an angle that suggested flanking. Dana stepped forward from the booth, one hand raised in a halt signal. Her voice stayed even. "Stop your vehicle. Lights on. Present ID." The first car didn't respond. The engine idled. A smear of fresh swamp mud streaked the rear tire, the kind that didn't come from the main access roads. She noted it, logged it mentally. Her thumb tapped the analog radio twice, switching to direct band. Checkpoint 1, requesting verification on incoming vehicle. Unmarked entry. No response to signal. Silence. She tried again. Still nothing. Main comms remained dead, either by error or design. The contractor opened his window halfway. She recognized him immediately. Same face. Same lazy smirk, but he didn't lean forward this time. His voice came slow. Technical issue with the tag reader again. "Sergeant Holt. Just let me through. No need to escalate." Dana didn't answer. She moved to the side panel, keeping her distance. Inside the back seat, just beneath a gray tarp, she saw it curved casing. Twin exhaust vents. Same as the archive image. Her hand moved toward her vest. The second vehicle's engine revved once. Its headlights came on in full beam, trying to blind her from behind. It pulled up fast along the outer edge, wheels turning as if to block her line of sight. Dana dropped to a knee behind the outer barrier and pulled the net launcher. The flash net snapped forward with a sharp hiss, wide and fast. It tangled across the front of the second car and caught under its tires. The driver swerved, panicked. The vehicle spun halfway, skidded against the curb, then stalled with a muffled grind of brakes. Shouting. One figure exited the second vehicle. Dana shouted back, commanding them to stand down. The figure ran. She turned her attention back to the first car. The contractor was out now. Standing beside the open door, he raised one hand but kept the other near his jacket hem. Dana recognized the posture. She lifted the dart gun. "Step away from the vehicle. Show me both hands." The man smiled again. Slow and cold. "You don't want to do that." He reached for the door. She fired. The EMP dart flew in a blur, piercing through the tarp and embedding directly into the side of the drone core. For a second, nothing happened. Then sparks burst outward, brief, sharp, and blue. The hum from the core cut out. A faint pulse that had been running barely audible vanished. Dana ducked behind the concrete pillar, counting the seconds. No detonation. Just steam rising through the fabric and the smell of burned circuitry. The contractor backed away now, eyes wide. No words left. He turned and tried to run, but she stepped out, baton drawn, and closed the distance before he cleared the hood. He didn't fight. Not really. He just sagged under the weight of knowing something had failed. Tires approached fast from the access road. Backup. 2 vehicles braked hard beside the checkpoint. Security forces dismounted quickly. Weapons raised. Dana raised both hands to signal clear, then pointed to the back seat. Cores neutralized. First vehicle contained, second one's disabled. The team moved in. One of them paused to glance at her vest. "You all right?" "Sergeant." She nodded once. "Uninjured." "Who called it in?" "No one." Comms were jammed. He looked at her for a second longer, then nodded. Rain began again. Thin and steady. It tapped gently on the drone casing, now inert and dark in the back seat. A thin trail of smoke curled from the puncture where the dart had struck. The red strobe from the checkpoint rotated slowly overhead, casting long shadows on the pavement. In her locker back at the armory, the sealed envelope still sat untouched. The serial number, the plate, the manifest, everything she'd written down before the night began. None of that had made it to the system. but it didn't need to. She had. Rain tapped steadily against the edge of the barrier, collecting in shallow puddles beside Dana Holt's boots. The ground beneath her was soft now, streaked with mud and the dark smear of skidded rubber. The drone core lay several feet away, still smoking faintly from the EMP impact, its surface hiss, whispering against the night air like a machine exhaling its last trace of power. Sparks no longer flickered. The casing didn't move, but she kept her weapon trained on it anyway. The perimeter light above her buzzed, flickered, and struggled to stay alive. Its stuttering glow cast elongated shadows across the checkpoint, breaking every few seconds into momentary darkness before stuttering back into view. Her flashlight stayed on, angled low across the ground, beams steady and focused. The rubber grip in her palm was damp from rain, but her hand didn't shift. She had held the same position for 8 full minutes since the breach attempt had ended. Her knees ached, but she didn't adjust her stance. Behind her, distant shouts broke through the fog. Reinforcements were sweeping the area. She heard boots slap wet pavement, metal doors slamming, radio chatter gaining strength. The contractor who had tried to flee was down now, face pressed to the asphalt, zip-tied and flanked by 2 guards from the security team. One of them gave a report over comms, confirming custody. Another team secured the second vehicle. Someone called in a drone recovery specialist, but Dana didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the drone core. Sergeant Holt. A voice called out nearby, low but clear. She didn't look up. The voice belonged to a field officer, one of the senior response team leaders. He crossed into her line of sight slowly, rain dampening the brim of his cover and the collar of his jacket. "You're clear. Stand down," he said gently. She finally shifted her stance just a half step back, then lowered the EMP launcher. Her thumb slid off the trigger with practiced care. The weapon clicked into safe mode. She held it at rest for another moment before holstering it against her side. The officer nodded toward the gate. "You did enough tonight." Dana reached up and unfastened the chin strap of her helmet, letting it hang loose against her collar. Then she crouched slowly and began checking her gear one item at a time. Flashlight, baton, sidearm, radio. She moved without urgency and without speaking. As she stood, the mud on her boots pulled free with a soft suction. It was the same patch of ground she had held since the first car crept through the mist. She hadn't taken a step in either direction since the breach began. The outline of her stance was still visible in the dirt, 2 steady marks, unmoved by panic, unwitnessed by most. She didn't ask what would happen next. She didn't need confirmation. The job had been simple. She had been the line, and she had held it. The tent was set up just beyond the motor pool, half collapsed at one corner and lit by a pair of battery-powered lanterns hooked to a metal pole. Inside, the folding table sagged slightly at the center, weighed down by a half-full binder, an untouched legal pad, and a plastic water bottle beading with condensation. Dana Holt sat with her gloves folded in her lap. Across from her, the officer in charge of the post-incident debrief didn't bother to meet her eye. He flipped through the pages like they were forms for inventory return. A few underlines marked her report time of breach. Gear used, outcome, but the details were already being abstracted. No mention of the EMP strike, no reference to the tarp-covered core. Just a phrase highlighted in green ink prevented unauthorized access. He slid a folder across the table. This covers non-disclosure for any elements flagged under the blackout directive. You'll find your name is listed under advisory status, not command action. Legal confirms no disciplinary review is pending. Dana didn't blink. She took the pen, signed where indicated, and closed the folder without reading the rest. The officer nodded once, already distracted by another set of documents. Your initial report was helpful. We've passed findings up to command for containment and review. There's no need for additional reporting at this time. The loop's being closed. She noticed the envelope was gone. The one she'd left in her locker, with the circled serial number, the manifest tag, and the still frame photo. No mention of it appeared in the report. No copy had been attached. She didn't ask. From the edge of the tent, a junior officer stepped forward holding a clipboard. His voice was quiet but clipped. "You're scheduled for perimeter duty tomorrow. 0400. No changes to your assignment." Dana nodded once. The man hesitated before handing over the clipboard, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Next time, if you think something's off, escalate through channels. Keeps it clean." The legal pad in front of her was still blank. No one had taken notes during the entire interview. The chair beside her remained empty from start to finish. No liaison. No observer. Just the slow process of administrative closure. She stood without being dismissed, tucked her gloves into her belt, and left the tent as silently as she had entered. Outside, the sky had begun to clear. The rain was gone. Stars peeked faintly through the remnants of cloud. The ground beneath her boots was still soft, but solid. Behind her, the lanterns cast a dull, yellow glow that barely reached the flap of the tent. In less than a day, that temporary structure would be gone. The incident filed, the memory already fading from official record. But Dana carried no illusion. The core had been real. The breach had been real. And someone had to stand there when it mattered, even if no one would say it. The morning light was soft and cool, washing the checkpoint in pale gold as the base stirred awake behind it. The same halogen bulbs buzzed faintly above the gate, casting familiar shadows across the concrete and scuffed metal barriers. Dana Holt stood beside the control hut, vest clipped in place, baton secured, flashlight checked. She ran her fingers down the fresh checklist she'd added to the logbook that morning, columned. Clear. More precise than the last. The margins were empty. For now, a young MP stepped out from the rotation vehicle. Boots clean. Uniform crisp. The new issue radio still stiff in its holster. He looked around with the casual energy of someone not yet convinced the job mattered. He adjusted his cover, stretched once, then nodded at Dana. "So, does anything ever happen out here?" Dana didn't look up. She just nodded once, quiet and steady. There was a pause as the young soldier waited for more, then gave up and started logging in. The routine resumed, unchanged on the surface. She reached for her backup radio analog, older model, now clipped to her vest where her map pouch used to sit. No one had asked her to carry it. No one had noticed. Her hand drifted toward the left pocket of her vest, empty now. The old printout was gone. She tapped the pocket once, then let her arm fall back to her side. The line still stood. She had held it. Now, she watched it. Just like before, Dana Holt never asked for recognition. She didn't need it. Her job was to watch the gate, log the details, and make sure nothing slipped through. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't loud. But when no one else was looking, she saw what mattered and acted. Not because someone gave her permission, but because it was right. That kind of strength doesn't come with medals. It comes from knowing who you are, even when the system forgets your name. Her story reminds us that courage doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it stands alone in the quiet, holding the line. If her story stayed with you, take a moment to reflect. Share your thoughts in the comments, or follow for more stories that honor the unseen strength behind every mission.